All right. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us here on the Transportation and Logistics podcast, powered by Atlanta Dispatch and Humblebee Enterprises. I am very, very, very blessed and very, very happy to be here with a special guest. We have Miss Kimberly King, who is the EEO Director of the Georgia Department of Transportation. And before we begin, I just want to start by saying that the Dispatcher's Guide to the Galaxy is available now as an ebook and a physical book. Definitely get your copy on Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, Apple, all those bad boys. Additionally, this past week, I had the opportunity, the pleasure of joining Project 44 and Parade for a happy hour here in the Atlanta area. And it just reminded me how important it is to get outside and network with other businesses. I got a chance to make some very, very meaningful connections and learn about some of the new technologies in our supply chain. So I was just very fortunate. And again, you got to get out there and network to get those opportunities. At this point, in such a soft market, nothing is being given, and you kind of have to get out there and go get it. So, I'm very fortunate and very happy to be here with Miss Kimberly King. To start out, I just want to ask you, what has been the largest opportunity that you have either given or you've received that came purely from networking? Is there anything that comes to mind when I ask that question?
Um, yeah, I guess a couple of things. The position I'm in now came largely from networking. I was at a meeting about something completely different. And some folk at that meeting overheard me talking about my experience and kind of walked up to me and said, "Hey, we've got a position. Sounds like you have some of the skill sets we're looking for. Would you be interested in submitting application and talking to us more about this responsibility?" So, being in the room with the right folk at the right time, is what networking is all about, and that has given rise to this opportunity for me, and this current opportunity has certainly lent itself to other ancillary opportunities based on that same networking concept.
Yes, ma'am. Well, look, again, it is a true pleasure to have you here on stage, and I thank you so much for accepting my invite. For those listening in that did not have the pleasure of attending the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Small Business Contractor Symposium that was hosted by the Mid-South Atlantic Small Business Transportation Center, please introduce yourself and let us know just a little bit about your background.
Sure. So, as Jory has indicated already, my name is Kimberly King. I am the Equal Employment Opportunity Director for the Georgia Department of Transportation. That means that I am responsible for all things civil rights, both internal and external, at the agency. I have been with GDOT now for about 10 years. I come from municipal government, so, local government has been my wheelhouse prior to coming here to the state of Georgia. I am from Illinois. I am a lawyer by trade, and so I worked both for the city of Chicago's law department and for my hometown of Peoria, Illinois' law department in employment law, collective bargaining, and appellate practice before moving to Georgia with my family in 2012, where I thought I was going to bake and write and sort of get in touch with my Earth Mother self. But two mortgages prevented that from happening, and my husband informed me that I was likely going to have to go back to work. And so the networking that I talked about early on in our conversation is where this opportunity arose, and I thought that it sounded like a good match for my skill sets and have been here 10 years now.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you again for joining. And, you said that you did a fair amount of employment law. Would you say that this right here naturally comes, or is it something that you feel like in this role, you've kind of like grown to love this new aspect of the equal employment side?
So, I think the legal background helped me in terms of the regulatory aspects of this job. So, most of my work is responsive to the federal government because GDOT is the recipient of federal funds from the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Transit Administration, and the Federal Aviation Administration, there are certain regulations that we must follow, certain programs that we must administer in the civil rights unit based on those relationships. And those federal regulations are probably, sort of more easily read and understood and applied with that legal background. And so that was at least part of what attracted me to the job. But the access that I have to the public to have conversations like this, Jory, frankly, to meet and talk with you at the bipartisan infrastructure law conversation, that's probably the best part of the job. That's the most fun for me, meeting folk, talking about the program, helping people to understand why they could or should have an interest in the program, and then what those points of entry are.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Well, look, let's talk about the reason that initially brought you and I together, the bipartisan infrastructure law. In your words, what is the BIL? What is this bad boy all about?
So, just as you and I have said a couple of times now, BIL is an acronym for Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It's also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. As many of you know, President Joe Biden came into office with equity as his overarching consideration for all programs in his administration. His objective was to pass significant legislation that would make some of those changes to right some of the wrongs in the past. But if you've been paying attention to the legislative sessions that have been happening since he's been in office, you know that he's been thwarted at almost every turn by his Republican counterparts. And so he's had to utilize executive orders to try and initiate programs that were going to speak to some of those equity initiatives that he wanted to do. And the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is one of those executive orders that says we are going to not only spend money to rebuild a crumbling American infrastructure, but we're going to make sure that some of those monies are spent with those Americans who have traditionally been left out of those considerations or greatly diminished in their access to those considerations. So the bipartisan infrastructure law provides trillions of dollars to in the states, and when I say trillions, those trillions are divided amongst those 50 states based on the size of the state, the size of their programs, the types of programs that they have, their need in terms of their infrastructure investment. But those monies are being spent in this country to make sure that our infrastructure can be shored up. And when we talk about infrastructure, we're obviously talking about roads and bridges, but we're also talking about energy. We're talking about water. We're talking about the port systems. We're talking about electronic vehicles. We're talking about signage, intelligent signage, and transportation signaling, to have the roadways and the vehicles on the roadways and the data systems that are collecting information about the traveling public all speak to one another. And so, what President Biden wants to do in terms of investment in our infrastructure is make sure that that investment is being equally or equitably shared with small business and with minority owned business. And so the Civil Rights Office, which is where I am housed at the Georgia Department of Transportation, is responsible for making sure that equity consideration is found in every part of the program that we administer. So it's about finding those disadvantaged businesses for us, or minority owned businesses, making sure that they are aware of the opportunities that are being made available, that they have access to those opportunities. Once that access is provided, that they are being treated fairly and equitably in their participation, excuse me, on those project types, whatever project types there are, and then that the federal government is receiving a regular and comprehensive report about what that participation looks like. What kinds of work are these minority-owned firms doing? When are they getting involved? How much money are we spending with them? Are those opportunities growing into other places of participation for those firm types? How many of those firm types are working? Those kinds of questions are being reported to the federal government so that they can see what programs are working, what programs are not working, tweaking those things that don't seem to be working at an optimal level, really um, repeating and sharing as best practices those things that are working. So the government, under the federal government, under the Biden administration, is really working hard to make sure that there is some visible benefit to minority communities, to underserved communities, to low income communities with the monies that are coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Yes, ma'am. Appreciate you. Thank you so much for that. From your perspective, what type of impact do you foresee point there? And the fact that we're in Atlanta, that's where
Mm-hmm.
we met, and I feel absolutely blessed to be here as a young black man who is an entrepreneur. I love being here because it's a normal thing to see people who look like me, who
Right.
are hitting, who are doing well in their life. They figured out the system that affords them the lifestyle that they were looking for, building generational wealth, breaking generational curses when it comes to finances, mental health, all type of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I love being in Atlanta for that being one of the reasons. But just to go back into the economical side of things, a lot of the individuals who I even went to college with, they come from successful black parents who became prosperous as a result of the Atlanta airport. So Hartsfield Jackson being constructed, and being one of those contractors that was actually helping in that project, and even the '96 Olympics, and being a part of that wave of new business. And I see this as that, like, this next opportunity. Would you agree? Like, do you think that's safe to say?
Oh, I think it absolutely can be, Jory. I think the other thing that is significant is how technology is really becoming such a significant part of road building, of the work that we do here at GDOT. I met, to your point about being in Atlanta, two young men that are Morehouse graduates, very recent Morehouse graduates. I want to say either 19 or 20, but they have started a software business that they talked to me about, and sort of, talk to me about how that business could lend itself to service offerings at the Georgia Department of Transportation or elsewhere in the state of Georgia with our purchasing department. But they identified themselves as one of only two such minority owned, African American owned businesses in the country. Not in Georgia, Jory, in the
Mm,
country. There is
mm.
another business that does what they do in terms of software development and housing, software in the cloud. And there was, probably more complex technological conversation that I was really able to grasp in its entirety, given the difficulty I had with logging into Clubhouse. We won't talk about that, but these two young men were able to identify themselves as one of two such businesses owned by African Americans in the country. The other, I believe they told me, was in Delaware. So, just this notion of being in Atlanta, doing things that have not been done before. Like, they really are pioneers in this industry, in this particular element of the tech industry. And so they have this whole world of opportunity that is available to them. And I am talking to them about, understanding how their service offering can fit at GDOT and fit elsewhere in the state of Georgia. So that's really exciting, right? To be able to first meet these two young men who are so extraordinary in their belief in themselves that we can be recent college graduates and take this leap into an area of technology that we just aren't doing, that we aren't seeing, that really is being served from other parts of the world and not necessarily in this country, but in this country we're doing it here in Atlanta, Georgia. So I think opportunity, Jory, to your point, is wide open, Access is readily available. You've got to be in the room to hear the conversations, to learn where you fit in, where you can fit in, where that access might be being provided. And certainly it is my objective to make sure that I am communicating that notion of access as often as I can, which is why I so readily agreed to have this conversation with you. Not only were you impressive, in your own right when we met at the infrastructure event, but just knowing that you have a community with whom I can have this conversation to open up that notion of access is absolutely what I am attempting to do on a pretty regular basis from my vantage point at the agency.
Yes, ma'am. Well, again, this is an honor to be able to have this conversation, and whatever I can do for those brothers to highlight whatever they have going on, maybe even leverage my network to get that in a place where they get some theme. I'm happy to do, and when it comes as it pertains to the bill, the BIL,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the differences of winning a solicitation at the federal level versus at the state level when it comes to the company's DBE status? Because that's something you and I discussed
Mm-hmm.
that I was surprised, but I definitely want to go into the ins and outs of that, of how it's different winning at the federal level versus that state level.
Sure. So early on in my conversation, I mentioned that the Georgia Department of Transportation is the recipient of federal funds. So that DBE program exists as a result of that receipt of those federal dollars. So the distinction that makes a difference between doing business at the federal level and doing business at the state level is that notion of DBE as a federal construct. So we must have such a program because we receive those funds. But we also need to make clear the way that those funds operate is really about subcontract. So disadvantaged business enterprise participation goals are set on federally funded projects where there are subcontract opportunities. So we will, every month, we let, between 20 and 70 projects. And those 20 to 70 design or construction projects are about, building a diverging diamond interchange on Camp Creek Parkway, or extending the fast lanes on Interstate 75, or extending the traffic lanes on Interstate 285 and 400, so that there's more room for more traffic, with the idea being that's going to move the traffic through faster. So when you have those kind of projects and we let them to bid, we have a prime contractor that's going to submit a proposal on that project. And the proposal that prime contractor submits is selected for award based on price. So whatever the lowest bid is that is able to do that work, that's the one that we're going to award to. And we're then going to look for that prime contractor to hire subcontractors to help it do the work on that project. So on those federally funded projects, those primes are looking for DBE subs because we have attached a DBE goal to that project. On the state side, you're not necessarily having goals attached to the project. You're having a procurement system that functions through the Department of Administrative Services that says any good or service that can be procured in the state of Georgia must be procured through this system. And so this system goes about asking businesses to please tell us how you can meet our needs as it relates to we're buying foodstuffs for the Department of Corrections, or we are resurfacing all of the playgrounds at the Atlanta Public School systems, or the University System of Georgia is buying books or computers, or it needs software assistance for its schools of business. Those are different kinds of procurement opportunities than those federally funded project opportunities. So your DBE certification is going to provide you entree to those federally funded projects where there is a goal attached. You do not need a DBE certification to gain entree to those state business opportunities because they're looking for, first and foremost, Georgia-based businesses. So they want, first and foremost, their businesses to come from Georgia, and then for those businesses to be small business if they can arrange for a small business to get that opportunity. So there is a difference you'll see between the federal engagement and the state engagement based on the kinds of business that is being procured.
Gotcha, gotcha. And let me just talk about one of the questions that I was interested in when we initially spoke, which was from being registered in sam.gov. I have access to solicitations, and those solicitations, they basically just want to make sure, they just want to go through whatever you're submitting, see that you know what you're talking about, have an actual price that's within the range. It doesn't have to be the absolute best, but they just
Mm-hmm.
have to feel that you can do it,
Mm-hmm.
even if you are not the person or the business that's going to do every aspect of that particular contract. You
Mm-hmm.
do intend to sub out some stuff. You can still win that bad boy.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned that was a little bit different, it really surprised me, was when it comes to the DBE status, the disadvantaged business enterprise status, that you're actually approved or qualified through the state as a DBE. Like, if you don't have that particular designation under within the DBE status, you cannot provide that service when the funds are being administered through the state level. Did I say that correctly?
So what you and I talked about, Jory, was DBE as a element of consideration for those projects on which goals were set, and there are very strict criteria that we abide by to make sure that the individual business that's in control of that project is in fact a DBE. So a DBE has to do a certain percentage of the work itself. A DBE has to be able to demonstrate credibly that it controls the work activity of that project. The DBE has to be able to identify itself as the owner of the business to whom the award has been made. So what happens is, if in trucking, for example, a DBE has to own at least one truck. And in order to get credit, so it's all about the credit that can be provided on that federally funded project. Can we hire you without a DBE certification? Absolutely. But you're a far less attractive firm on a project that has a DBE goal because we're looking for DBEs. So, yes, we want someone who technically has the ability to do the work, but if you have the ability to do the work and you're a DBE, you're a better candidate. So that notion of subbing out parts of the work is less available to a DBE firm because it diminishes the likelihood of that DBE firm being in control of the work activity. Does that make sense?
Oh, perfectly. I'm so happy that I have you as a resource to talk about this, because there are some intricacies that I'm happy that we're bringing light to, and so I appreciate you. Yes, that definitely makes sense. When
Okay.
you started speaking earlier, you talked about letting, that you
Mm-hmm.
let. What does that mean for the folks like myself who are on the newer side to contracting?
Sure. So, as I indicated to you again early on in my conversation, I am part of the civil rights unit of the agency, but GDOT is an almost 4,000 person organization, and all 4,000 of those folks operate in a particular unit of the agency. So, the unit of the agency that is responsible for thinking about our projects is the planning department. So, the planning department sits down every 5 years and says, this is the kind of work that we need to be doing. We need, again, that diverging diamond interchange. We need new fast lanes. We need a new turn lane on Interstate 75. Whatever that is, they start thinking about that. And when they are finished sort of determining what the plan will be for the agency in terms of what kinds of projects are necessary, it's then turned over to the engineering department to begin designing those projects. And once the project is designed, it's then turned over to construction for them to begin talking about what it's going to cost to build the project. And then once the project is turned over from construction, it goes to what's called bidding administration. And bidding administration is the one that says, okay, we've got 700 projects over the next 5 years. Let us let X number of those projects every month. So letting means to identify the projects and to make them available to the contracting public to bid on so that we can start getting the work done.
Oh, perfect. Man, you gave me you gave me the entirety of
I
what I
did. I'm
needed
sorry.
to.
That may have
No,
been more
no,
information than you needed, Joy, but I wanted to
no.
I
That's
want you to
perfect.
clearly understand sort of what that process looks like.
No, you're speaking my language. That's what I look for, so that I can understand the full process and see how everything comes together. So no, I appreciate that so much. You even talked about the project engineers and how
Hmm.
those are the folks that really are determining how much work needs to be split out or
Right.
set aside for the DBE candidates.
That's right.
Yes, ma'am. So no, I truly truly appreciate that. We talked about this in the sense that many of these contracts are catered to construction companies, asphalt companies, dump
Yes.
truck companies,
Yes.
etc.
Hmm.
As it pertains to traditional trucking, like those who are delivering goods from A to B,
Hmm.
are they directly accounted for in these solicitations and these projects, or is it, you know, something else?
They are not, Jory, because when I talked about, from planning to design to bidding to from construction to bidding. So when we talk about our projects, we are talking about the engineer's estimate that goes through the project line by line and says, these are the elements of work associated with this project. That's done so that we can value the project, so that we can say, this is a $10 million project, or it's $100 million project, or it's $1 billion project. That engineer's estimate is how we determine how to attach a goal to the project based on the number of work items that are attached to that project, the dollar value associated with that work item, and then the DBEs that operate in the space where that work item is anticipated. So when we talk about those line items, we're talking about the work that actually happens on the project. And for us, trucking and hauling is about bringing dirt to or from the project, or bringing riprap to or from the project, or hauling those materials away from the project. It is not about delivering items to the project, though it could be. So even if it's not in the engineer's estimate, here's an example. Medical supply is not something that's going to show up in an engineer's estimate, but we know that on every federally funded project there must be a first aid station. So if that prime contractor were to buy his first aid supplies to fill that station from a DBE medical supply firm, I should say, the prime contractor could use that DBE medical supplier toward the goal. So simple math, let's say we've got a $1 million project that has a 10% goal. That means $100,000 of that project should be spent with disadvantaged business enterprises. So that prime can do 10 $10,000 contracts, two $50,000 contracts, or a single $100,000 contract. But we've set the goal knowing what kind of work activity is attached to that project based on the engineer's estimate. But if that prime comes to us and says, hey, we've got a DBE firm that does medical supplies, we're going to buy $10,000 worth of medical supplies from the ABC company that's a DBE. They get to count that $10,000 that they're spending toward that $100,000 goal, even though that particular item did not show up in the engineer's estimate because it's not anticipated as a part of the project, but is a necessary and viable area of participation for DBEs.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that definitely makes a lot of sense right there. And I wanted to have this conversation with this community because trucking has been so challenging over the last 18 months. 2 years ago, the golden age of trucking, people were not ever thinking that things were gonna, just implode the way that they have. But
Hmm.
now we have all of these very smart, talented individuals who had their own businesses who got pushed out of the market. So I'm hoping, I'm praying that this can be an opportunity to pivot and find a different niche, a different lane, a different way of building that business that's going to be passed on within the families. And with, like I said, with all this stuff that was going on back in the 90s with the Olympics, and just the way that I see so many prominent black people, affluent black people here
Hmm.
in Atlanta, I want to do everything that I can to bring attention to it. And a lot of time, it's just a matter of beforehand not having the information, not having the resources. But now it's different. The information is here. We're having the conversation. In your opinion, why is it important to act now?
I think because we are all aware of what this BIL opportunity means, but it is for a time certain. This BIL opportunity is a direct result of who's in the White House. And if and when that administration changes, this very well could become a lesser priority or a non starter priority. Like it doesn't even appear on the radar anymore. And so, we've got to strike while the iron is hot, if you will. And right now, this equity conversation is happening. There is an absolute consideration for all things, government sponsored to have, a this notion of equity attached to it. So everyone is thinking about that, and everyone is thinking how to further that conversation and how to make sure that substantively they can demonstrate, they meaning federal government, state government, local government. We Let's be clear that most opportunities that have been provided to African Americans in this country have been provided by that self same government that worked so hard to diminish those opportunities. We've done much better in the government sector than we have done in the private sector. I graduated at the top of my law school class, but I had a very hard time finding employment when I first got out of law school in private firms. My offers came from the U.S. Attorney's Office, the City of Chicago's legal department, the state attorney appellate prosecutor in Mount Vernon, Illinois. Those were the kinds of opportunities that were being made available to me. And it was through the government, both the federal government and the state and the local government. So let us be clear on, how the government has sort of been, a little bit schizophrenic about its black citizens in that, you've got laws that keep us from certain opportunities, but at the same time, you are making more opportunity available, perhaps, than the private sector has done. And so, because we have the administration that we have right now, this is the time. Like this, now is the time to get involved in these projects, in this activity, in the expenditure of these funds as it relates to transit, as it relates to transportation, as it relates to the environment, as it relates to technology. The government is doing business and is the largest expender of funds in the country. So if you can get business with the government's business, that's the place to be.
Right, right, right. And, going back to the fact that this might be an avenue for people to pivot that were in traditional trucking,
Mhm.
have you, from your spot, being there with GDOT for 10 years, have you ever seen, witnessed any companies that were novices in the government contracting space that went from really nothing to really excelling and, as a government contractor?
I have. And I can tell you that trucking and hauling, the way I describe it, Jory, in terms of, that rip rap to or from the job site, or hauling dirt away from the job site, or whatever that is. Those are the areas that most prime contractors want to use because it's easy. We're setting a goal on a project that has 15 different work activities. And so we're setting that goal based on those 15 work activities. And the prime only wants to use that one, right? And we're saying, look, there are 14 other work. There are all these other areas. There's landscaping, there's erosion control, there's some marketing work, that all of these other areas, and you are insistent on using just this one. Expand beyond that area of work, right? So that's sort of an aside, but I wanted to say that to you to help you understand that trucking is absolutely a viable area of work on those federally funded projects. But what we see with these small and disadvantaged businesses is that there's a niche created because relationships are so important. And so, even though the Georgia Department of Transportation spends billions of dollars every year on its roadway investment, its prime contractor community is pretty small, Jory. There are probably 15 prime contractors that get the bulk of those billions of dollars. And those 15 prime contractors tend to work with the same subcontractors on all of their work because they've built a relationship with those subcontractors. They know those subcontractors, they know the quality of the work those subcontractors do. They do it on time, they do it on budget, they get in and get out. That's who those primes want to work with, that's who they continue to work with. And some of those firms have grown beyond, the DBE program because they get so much work. DBE is not just about ethnicity and gender, it's also about certain other criteria, one of which is business size in terms of your gross receipts and your personal net worth. You might be owned by a minority or a female, but if you are a wealthy individual, you're not disadvantaged for purposes of program participation. So some of these firms that started out with us as DBEs have grown beyond the confines of the program because they got so much work. And they are construction management firms. They are in some instances, airport concessionaires, those restaurant businesses that you see at the airport. You have a single business owner that has a Popeyes franchise, a Five Guys franchise, and um, um, uh, uh, the Cinnabon, right? So you've got one business that owns all three of those, and they have a presence in 12 or 15 airports throughout the country. That business is probably not disadvantaged anymore because they've grown, so large in terms of their receipts and their personal net worth that they no longer fit the definition of disadvantage, which sometimes is great because that means they've grown big enough to be self-sustaining. But sometimes those businesses find that if they don't have that DBE designation, they don't have that same kind of relationship with some of those airports and those prime contractors because, again, they're looking to meet a goal and they're utilizing the firms that are going to help them to do that.
Right. Now that you want to work with the people who you understand the caliber of work. I mean, it makes
That's right.
sense. Which goes back to the original question of this conversation about networking. It's just like how
That's
important
right.
is it to get yourself into the different rooms that these individuals are either just going to be, just at, or they're going to be at and engaging and sharing game. And that event that I met you at, I was so impressed with the caliber of the information that was presented, the fact that it was free.
Right.
It was free to me to go there and meet all of these individuals and see the players, who are the prime contractors making the moves, to learn of the different agencies who are actually facilitating how those funds are going to be distributed out to the various contractors and all the people in between. Like, what?
Right.
I never thought I was going to be meeting the folks from the FAA,
Mm-hmm.
but to hear about and with such clarity and passion that they are even trying to get folks on their projects. It left a very great feeling, and I just want to do my part to share the game that I got. And with that being said, it makes me want to ask you. I know it varies by state. Like it
Mhm.
definitely does. But are there any resources that you would direct those to who are interested in obtaining their certifications, their DBE certifications specifically?
Absolutely. So everything is virtual and electronic now. So we have a website that is www.dot.ga.gov, Gov as in Victor. That is the Georgia Department of Transportation's website. When you go to that website and you click on doing business, it'll take you to the DBE page. And when you get to that DBE page, the application for DBE certification is there. There are frequently asked questions there about DBE certification. There is an instruction, sort of a set of sort of roadmaps to why doing your DBE certification is a good idea for a firm that you get to sort of scroll through and think about. But there are also supportive services provided there. Supportive services is the notion of having a contract consultant that GDOT pays to be available to individuals that are certified or individuals that are interested in getting certified to answer any question they might have, to help them with training, to help them review existing opportunities, to look at past opportunities to see what has been let previously and how it was awarded, so that that firm now has a better idea of how to frame their own proposal for award. So those supportive services, I cannot say enough about how great those supportive services are. It's like having a tutor for your calculus exam, right? That has done calculus at a high level, that understands what the testing is going to look like, that has access to an old test so they can help you. You can do a practice test and then they can go through your answers with you and say, you missed these three because you didn't include this, because you didn't think about it this way, because you didn't attach this particular problem. So our supportive services are a wonderful tutor to our DBEs or to those firms that have DBE aspirations, because they really can help you through the process, answer your questions, help you look at the instructions and the benefit on the other side to your firm of becoming DBE certified if you determine that's something that you have an interest in.
Gotcha. Well, look, I think that I've really gone through the questions that I wanted to get answered here tonight. Was there anything that I didn't cover that you do feel like you just want to be able to get out so that people can have access to? Is there anything like that?
I think that you did a great job, Jory.
Thank you.
um, but I'll sort of end where we began, and that's with the networking. It is all about relationships. It is all about being in the room where the conversations are happening. There are no dumb questions. Ask what you need to know, because that's only going to benefit you. But know where best to ask those questions. I tell my own staff that my expectation of the EEO office is that they be knowledgeable, they be professional, and they be responsive. And part of that being knowledgeable is knowing as much what you don't know as what you do know. Being able to say, you know what, this is not my area, is making clear that you know and understand what your area is, right? I don't want to say yes to something that is not in my wheelhouse because I don't have the kind of understanding of that subject matter that I should. And so the ability to network appropriately with those firms that you should be networking with, being in those rooms, asking the right questions is so important. So I will say to you, make sure that you are taking advantage of that access where it's provided, and where it's not, ask where it should be, right? Ask where you can get that access. And that's both with us at the DOT, as well as I think with the state of Georgia. Know that whatever your politics are, this governor is really, really serious about Georgia business and growing Georgia business. So if you are a business owner in Georgia, you are from Georgia, your business is housed here in Georgia, the state of Georgia wants to do business with you. And that's all kinds of business. So, taking a look at what's called the Georgia Procurement Registry, which is the system that the state uses to procure goods and services, is a great way to see what is being purchased in Georgia, who's buying what you're selling, either as a product or as a service. That's a great place to start looking for those opportunities.
Oh, well, thank you. And just from personal experience, she definitely hooked me up with not only getting me registered for this platform, but also with the technical support to make sure that I understood what I was looking at when I was going through the
Right.
registry, when I was going through to make sure that that's just as important. Is understanding what information you're looking at, how to navigate the site. So again, I've been thoroughly impressed since getting introduced to this. Just everything. But definitely when I attended that symposium and you and I met, so I've just been very very impressed. And I just want to say again, thank you so much for joining me here tonight. And I know that you just closed on the networking piece.
Mhm.
If is there Are there any closing remarks beyond that right now?
I think that's everything I have, Jory. I appreciate your invitation. It was so nice to talk to you again. I appreciate the opportunity to share this information. My email address, let me give that to you so that if people on your call have questions or want to know more about the program, I can talk to them or direct them accordingly. And I generally do better with email than I do with the telephone because I get kind of busy. But the email address is KI, so the first two initials of my first name, which is Kimberly, King. So KIKING at DOT.ga.gov. And I know you know that address. So if you want to share that with your audience, please feel free to do so, Jory.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So everybody, I appreciate the support as always, and that is going to wrap up tonight's discussion. Please tune in on Wednesday. I'm actually going to be talking to a brother that is a freight forwarder. He has built a company that now imports the most Chinese goods into Mexico than any other freight forwarder. So I'm excited to talk to him and just to learn more about his background and how he is pivoting to include his operation into the United States by way of Texas. So if you guys are interested in freight forwarding and how to get into that business, I know the brother is hiring too. So, it might be an opportunity for you to learn more about him. So when you do reach out, you can have some of that personal data. So again, Miss King, I appreciate you and you have a blessed one.
Thank you. You too, Jory.
Thank you.